is Dazed and Confused, his film from 1993. The logline: The adventures of high school and junior high students on the last day of school in May of 1976. Written and directed by Richard Linklater. A big cast here, but a couple highlights here: Jason London, Matthew McConaughey, Ben Affleck, Joey Lauren Adams, and Parker Posey. So it's definitely a big cast. So at this time, actually, when I saw this film, I didn't really even know who he was. I mean, I saw this, I
Mhm,
think, actually, I did saw this before even I Slacker and the whole Kevin Smith conversation I
mhm,
mentioned to you. This would run on cable TV all the time. And
hmm.
for my generation, I'll say this was definitely a movie where it was an important, as a young high school kid or a junior high kid, of like a movie where it's like, okay, maybe you're a little young for this, but this might be what it's like when you're a senior. And there was that aspirational piece of it because it was seniors and junior high students in the 70s. And also this ethos of, I grew up as the firstborn. I was the eldest and I had two
Hmm.
sisters, so I never had a brother or an older brother especially. And this movie always to me felt like, if I had an older brother, this would be like the movie A, he would tell me to watch, or B, like the lessons that this movie imparts and the experiences that happen in this movie would have been what I would have experienced. So I
Hmm.
always kind of associated this. So this movie is like the older brother that I never had in a way. Yeah, I think this movie really does hit on the Linklater style of, this is literally just hang out. There's barely any plot in this movie at all. There is a thread that actually on this rewatch I kind of picked up on, which I'll get into in a second, which I found kind of interesting. But just, yeah, just a bunch of people, cool people, not cool people, nerds, jocks, everyone, just on this last day of school, 24-hour period, similar to like before Sunrise, where it's just a very one slice of time, which I appreciate those
Hmm.
types of movies too. And you're just following these kids and what they're up to. And I just find it funny, fun in terms of where each of these characters end up. And then it introduced me to a lot of people that I eventually thought were, especially through the Kevin Smith films, like super cool, like Ben Affleck, Joey Lauren Adams, Parker Posey, through a lot of her independent comedies she was doing in the 90s. Like, it was fun to like see these people when they were first starting out. Yeah, this movie is still really funny and fun to me, and I still enjoy it to this day. Curious on your thoughts on this film too, if it was in heavy rotation on cable in India as well, like it was here in the States.
I wish I would have really enjoyed it and learned so much because, like you, I'm the eldest child as well. So I didn't have any older siblings or an elder brother to sort of show me the ropes. So I
Hmm.
wish I saw this movie much later in life. And yeah, this is kind of a masterpiece, of this kind of a movie that, like you said, has no plot, but is sort of the quintessential vibe movie.
Right.
And it has become kind of an evergreen representation, give or take, of what life can be. And that's just so fascinating, right? Like, it's just so specific to the 70s. And of course, not all of that happens now. I certainly went through a pretty rigorous hazing phase when I went to college. So watching this movie, when I did watch it, was sort of traumatic to kind of bring back some of the old memories of
Oh yeah.
how hard it was to kind of go through that phase and what have you, but also find yourself. But I think I'm curious to talk to, I mean, I don't know any young people younger than us per se, that how does this movie land on them now?
Actually, it's
Yeah.
funny just to jump in there. So I was curious about that too, and
Mm,
I was actually had volunteered at a film festival last weekend. And
mm-hmm,
the last day at the party, one of the rap parties, I drove some people home. I was like the Uber driver, and one of the
mm,
people I drove home was a like 21 or 22-year-old grad student. And I was asking him, because he was a film school, like, okay, who are some of your favorite directors? Just always curious. And he
mm-hmm,
mentioned Richard Linklater. I was like, oh, really? Like, what films do you
mm.
like of his? And he said Dazed and Confused. And I was like,
Ah,
oh, really? I was like, so that movie is still like around, like kids your age, your age. I sound like an old man, but I am an old man.
eh,
I was like, you guys still watch that and talk about it? He's like, oh my God, yeah, like it's a movie that gets passed around. Like I saw in high school. Like, oh my God. So I think that is, it's an anecdote. It's one
amazing.
guy, but it seems like this movie is still reaching the youth today, which I was like, oh, that's so cool. Like it made
Yeah,
me feel like really cool. Like, yeah, I thought that was cool when I was a kid. Young kids today still think it's cool. I just thought that was
it's just
so,
so great to hear
again,
that.
anecdote, but I felt good to know that.
Yeah, because there's something true there, right? Like that's what I tap into again and again about Linklater. When he's not bogged down by plot and things, he's able to capture just through these slices of life and time something really true about interactions, and then makes it really entertaining and funny, right? Like this
Hmm.
movie is funny. The music is absolutely
Amazing.
top notch, like a banger,
Yeah.
film score that you can just put on and just totally listen to it and be transported, but also enjoy it right now. So it's those things that makes it evergreen. The other thing that's also really cool, unlike a lot of other kind of college or high school movies where they often kind of pit groups against each other, right? They're these cliche groups. And of course, all of those people are in this movie too. But in my experience, maybe people from different groups were not best friends, but they did hang out together, because that's what college is. It's kind of a melting pot of a place where whether you like it or not, or you want it or not, you're thrown into situations together with the popular kid, the nerdy kid, the in-between kid, whatever. And I love that all these people are just hanging out together. And ultimately, it's about having a good time, and it just feels so natural in that way. That's how
Yeah.
my experience was.
No, definitely. Like, yes, in high school and in college, there were cliques for
Mm-hmm.
sure, but the cliques were not as like hard edged. There was
Mm-hmm.
blurry lines between that. And I think this movie, I like how you see that too. Like, okay, the one girl's really nerdy, but she does get pulled in by the cool girls at one point. And yeah, like the stoner guys, they're all stoner guys, but they also have interactions with the jocks a little bit because there's
Right.
relationships. And I think that is what this movie authentically shows how cliques actually are. Yeah, there are cliques and there's groups, there's the stoners, there's the nerds, whatever, but there is overlap, and that it's not just so you cannot talk to someone who's not in your group, like a Mean Girls kind of thing. Like
Yeah.
that movie is great, but it's heightened high
It's
school,
heightened.
and this
Exactly.
is really what high school, at least in my experience, and
Yeah.
college too, was like. And I
Yeah.
think this movie does that, captures that brilliantly.
Yeah, totally. And then I guess the other thing is kind of the honest, just not knowing where life is headed and also where tomorrow is headed or where
Hmm.
tonight is headed. Like that's just captured so beautifully. It's just so spontaneous, right? That, oh, you don't know what you're going to be doing this evening, but
Right.
it'll be fun and we'll figure it out. There's sort of this nonchalantness to living life in the moment, but also what's going to happen post college. But then maybe you're going to get into this with the thread is like as the
Yeah.
movie comes to a close, it does all start to then zoom out and start to kind of pose these questions of, okay, what now? And it
Yeah.
all kind of lines up towards that without making it super heavy handed.
Yeah, that was so interesting on this watch. Like, I'd seen this movie a bunch of times in
Mm-hmm.
junior high, high school, college. I hadn't seen it maybe like 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Want rewatching it, but I was starting to compare it to another movie we covered on the podcast, American Graffiti, which is
Uh-huh.
a similar like hangout movie, one night,
Yep.
people that are like, okay, what do I do? I'm now going off to college or not. And that movie, which was, made by George Lucas, who was, baby boomer generation, released in 1971, I think, 72. There seemed to be a lot more like emotional weight placed on this decision of like, okay, what do I
Right.
do? I'm pondering this. It's like my
It's
life
right
could go
in the
this way.
beginning.
It's so much so about like this big decision and it means a lot. And if I do this one thing, my whole life will be different. Whereas this movie, where it has a similar theme, similar time period, one night, high school students, and there's some seniors in there, people just be like, you know what? I don't, yeah, there's like a decision, but who cares? Like, I'll figure it out. It was a lot more
Right.
like, even though Richard Linklater's not in Gen X per se, because he's older than Gen X, but it's more of a Gen X attitude. At least I always associate this movie with Gen X, that of like, whatever. I don't really care. It doesn't really matter. Okay, fine. Like, I'm not going to sign the pledge to say I'm not going to drink or have sex during the summer for my high school football, but who cares? It's like
Mm-hmm.
the weight of the life decisions that were in American Graffiti and maybe that generation of like everything is so serious and I make this one choice, my entire life could be different. This movie, it's like, okay, I'll make a choice, I'll not make a choice. Like, I'll just sort of like go through life and it'll be fine or not be fine, whatever. Like, it's more of like a whatever attitude than this self-seriousness. I mean, I love American Graffiti, but the self-seriousness of the characters, I don't know. I just was starting to find that juxtaposition, and maybe it's says the difference between the two generations or something. I don't know. Maybe I'm just grasping at straws here, but I thought it was interesting that like I kept waiting for like, is there going to be a thread in this movie? And it kind of is that it's basically just him signing that or not signing that pledge for his football
Right.
captain. Like, that's like the biggest decision that happens. Instead of an American Graffiti, it's much more of a my whole life will be different. Am I grasping at straws here
No, you're
about
totally
what
right.
Gen
And
X means?
no, and you're totally right. There's definitely that at play. In fact, I read somewhere that Linklater kind of wanted this to be American Graffiti set up in Linklater's kind of
Oh,
college
really?
going days. So
Oh,
there's
interesting.
definitely a connection there, just the way Josh Lucas wanted it. There's a generation thing that you're talking about, but I also think there's like a film stylistic thing as well at
Hmm.
play. Of course, I was not alive in any of these two generations, but
Right.
I would rather think, even if this was a big decision that was weighing on you, depending on who you were, I don't think you would be carrying that around with you and talking about it all the time. And that's why this movie just lands better on me. We talked about American Graffiti. I'm okay on that movie,
Hmm.
obviously. Enjoy it. I love the period detail and all of that, but it is that aspect because it's just so heavily laid out, which I don't know if people behave that way. Maybe they did in that generation, but I think there's just like a stylistic choice that was made. This just feels a lot more organic and natural to me, where yeah, it's there in the air, but
Hmm.
it's not something that you are constantly talking about.
Hmm. Yeah, it's
But
just it's
maybe it's a
interesting.
generational thing too. Who knows?
Yeah, because they both were looking back. I mean, George Lucas much older when he made American Graffiti, not much older, but 10 years or so from that, and Linklater too. This is a
That's the
movie
other
set in the
thing.
70s, made in the 90s. So it's
Yeah.
like how they look back and think about that. And maybe one generation thinks about every decision and sort of gives it too much weight. And then the Linklater's not part of Gen X, but I associate it with that of just like
Mhm.
whatever. Like that whole generation, sort of like we'll just sort of figure it out or not, or who cares.
Right.
That's just interesting. But yeah, this movie still works really well. And I'm glad, like when I had that conversation with that kid in the car, that wow, great. Like this is still there, still reaching kids.
That's
So
so cool.
yeah.
I guess the last thing I would say about this is like Linklater's eye to cast these people, such a huge cast, give them all moments.
Oh
And
yeah.
look, some of them vanished and some of them became huge stars, but it's pretty amazing to see all these people in this one movie.
Oh
It's
yeah.
not easy to have that eye. I will say though, the lead of the movie has never worked for me. The one
Oh
guy, the
really?
villain.
Oh,
Yeah, I
well,
just
the main kid with the long hair, that kid?
yeah. And
Oh.
in fact, it took me a few watches to finally watch this movie fully and really enjoy it because the first few times I've watched it, I just couldn't get past that kid because it's just so awkward and just a bad actor. And
Uh.
I mean, I get right, like part of that is the character. Like he's
Hmm.
supposed to be kind of nervous and twitchy and rubbing his nose all the time and what have you. But there's something about just the bad acting aspect of it just really rubbed me.
Oh.
Now I've kind of gotten past it, but he does not age well, I think.
Okay, well, I won't say that I identify most with him then. Hi there, it's Alex. If you like the review and discussion Karan and I just had, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Movies That Shaped Us, to get full episodes. Every other Wednesday, Karan and I review a new release and then discuss 6 other movies made by that film's actor or director and how they shaped us. Subscribe right now or follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts via the link in the description below. Hope you join us for the journey.